Hello and welcome to Listening to the Verde. My name is Max Wilson. I'm the Program Manager for Sustaining Flows at Friends of the Verde River. I am lucky enough today to be joined by Dr. Gary Beverly. He's the President of the Citizens Water Advocacy Group and the Chair of the Yavapai Group of the Grand Canyon Chapter of the Sierra Club. Gary, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, great. I'm so glad to be here. I love coming to the Verde Valley to talk to you folks.
Great. Can you tell us a little bit about your background before we dive into some questions?
Sure. I guess I came to Arizona in 1974 to teach chemistry and physics at Yavapai College, and then I kind of segued to various other jobs, solar contracting, etc., and finally wound up with a retail computer store that I sold in 2006 and retired. And of course, retirement means that you can pick what you want to work on. You don't have to work on what somebody else tells you have to work on. So since then, I've been working pretty much full-time as a volunteer for the Sierra Club and specifically on the Verde River.
Great. Well, thank you for making the drive over today. We really appreciate it. 1974, things were a lot different back then.
Back then, in Prescott, the restaurants closed for lunch.
So can you tell me about the first time you visited the Upper Verde? What was it like?
Well, when we in the 70s, we used to hike down onto the river and look at it and have picnics, and also at Del Rio Springs, which is very close to our house. I live in Chino Valley, very close to the headwaters of the Verde. And, it was a gushing, roaring stream. But I was working really hard. These 80-hour-week jobs really don't make much time for going out and having fun. So I really dug into the Verde in 2006. And there may be a photo on screen now showing the classic scenic beauty that's present on this river. And that's one real good reason to appreciate it and protect it, but there's actually many more reasons too. It was and still is. It still is a really nice place, and it still is in really nice condition. It's a functioning, living river at this point, but we're scared for its future.
Tell me what that means, a living river.
A living river is perennial. That is, it has a base flow 24/7, 365. A living river has natural vegetation on the banks. And a living river has natural flood flow cycles, which are important for recruitment of trees and animals, birds, and all animals. So the Verde is the sole surviving living river in Arizona out of 6. The San Pedro is like struggling to stay alive.
Barely smidging along.
Super important, small little desert river. And it's, after years of work, it's still just hanging on by a trickle, It's really sad the way Arizona has exploited its rivers. The Verde is kind of the last one standing.
It's funny, that's what I tell people who aren't from Arizona sometimes, is they don't realize that, in our grandparents' lifetime or our great-grandparents' lifetime, this was the land of rivers, right? You came to Arizona, there was the blue, the black, the white, the Verde, the San Pedro, the Santa Cruz. Not that long ago we had all these rivers flowing, and they aren't flowing anymore.
Yeah, people don't think of it. People think of Arizona as a desert with the iconic saguaro, but we actually had rivers, The Colorado River on our west coast there's water there, but it's completely managed, channelized, diverted, litigated, never reaches the Sea of Cortez. The Gila River is the second order drainage stream for Arizona, and it drains all of Arizona except for the little Colorado drainage up in the northern part of the state. So the Gila was one of the first rivers that was completely exploited by the westward moving settlement, cattle growing, Coolidge Dam, cotton, alfalfa. Right now, the Gila River looks like it's a dry ditch in the desert with tumbleweeds blowing in it, and it's really sad.
So thinking about how things have changed then, how has the Upper Verde changed since you first saw it there in the 70s, but especially maybe since 2006 when you started working on it a lot more?
Well, there's less water in it. I mean, it's the base flow is going down continually. Base flow would be that component of the flow that it's not from rainfall. It's from springs that come up from groundwater. So base flow depends on groundwater. Most southwestern desert rivers are base flow, spring, and groundwater dependent rivers. And so that groundwater resource has been is diminishing, and so the flow of the river is diminishing. And so there's just less water. And so there's a graph on the screen, I hope now, that shows that since about 1996, the flow of the river has been in a fairly steep decline. I think that that's due to groundwater pumping in the upper watershed and significantly due to climate change. There's less recharge into the groundwater aquifer. Because there's higher temperatures and less rainfall. We're in a drought now that's kind of the worst. Well, we were going to talk about climate change later, so I'll save that.
Yeah, before we dive into that, can you tell our viewers, I think one of the things that even I struggle with sometimes is recognizing, like, where is all this groundwater, right? Because you can't see it. Where are the flows from the Upper Verde coming from? Have they changed in recent years? It sounds like you've said flows have declined a little bit, but why and where?
And so there was a chart on the screen that showed the declining flow, and then the source of the base flow is the Big Chino aquifer. So on screen you can see on the right there's a green squiggly line, the Verde River. Then there's kind of a red squiggly line. That's the upper 25 miles of the river. And the sole source of water for that red zone there is Verde Springs. And there's a kind of a blue splashy star thing that indicates where that is. The water that comes from Verde Springs is supplied by groundwater in the Big Chino aquifer, which is kind of outlined there in purple. And the community of Paulden is right where that Verde Springs star is. So 80 to 86% of that water comes from the Big Chino, and about 14% comes from the Little Chino watershed to the south. So there's really two sources of groundwater that provide water to Verde Springs, and that is the sole source of water for the first 25 miles. So if you take water out of those aquifers, then there's less water to flow out of the springs. And it's a one-to-one thing. You pull 1,000 acre-foot out of the aquifer, eventually there'll be 1,000 acre-feet less water flowing down the river. So we're really concerned about controlling groundwater pumping in the Little Chino and Big Chino aquifers.
And when you say the sole source for that first 25 miles, am I understanding correctly, that means if you lost that set of springs, there'd be no water at all for that first 25.
And in that 25 miles, it's critical habitat for 3 threatened and endangered species fish listed under the Endangered Species Act: the loach minnow, the spiked dace, and the razorback sucker, plus the yellow-billed cuckoo, plus 2 snakes. So there's critical habitat in that riparian area. This is a really important area. It's some of the finest riparian habitat surviving in the state of Arizona. Nobody knows it's there because it's all buried deep inside Prescott National Forest, and the only way to get into there is through 2-track ranch roads, and it's just people don't go in there much. So they don't know how cool it is and how important it is.
Well, I think that's one of the challenges with the Verde in general. Even the areas that we do have people with a lot of easy access, like the Verde Valley or some of the areas down by Phoenix and Scottsdale. I think I can say this as a born and raised Phoenician. Most people in the state don't know how cool this resource is, and that it's right there and it's available.
You folks in the Verde Valley are lucky because you've got like 6 bridges crossing the river, and you've got businesses and homes lining the river throughout the valley, and so people have a much better sense of its value. In West Yavapai County, in Prescott Valley, Chino Valley area, the river is unknown and underappreciated. It's hidden away, and so people tend to want to protect what they know. If they don't know it, they're not going to stand up for it. They're not going to protect it. So that's a problem that we have.
Absolutely. So you've talked a little bit about flows declining, and we've talked about the flows coming from groundwater. I mean, kind of putting 2 and 2 together here, what's causing the flows to decline then
Well, any kind of groundwater pumping in the Big Chino, since that's 80% of the base flow, that's the one we're really focused on.
And so we're talking about the area kind of northwest of Prescott up to I-40?
Northwest of Paulden up to I-40, yeah, the Big Chino Valley. So there's 3 factors there that can really hurt us in the future, and any one of these can completely dry up the river. So there's 3 existential threats in the Big Chino. One is just population growth from Paulden. It is a growth center in Yavapai County, and as people just build homes and drill domestic wells and water their stock, it hurts the river, you know. A second is expanded agricultural irrigation. So, you know, in Kingman and Wilcox, big farms have come in out of California and pumped vast amounts of irrigation water and dried up domestic wells nearby and caused a lot of problems. And the Big Chino is potentially a target for that. You know, one alfalfa, 1,000 acres of alfalfa up there could pull 5,000 acre feet. That's half the river right there. So, I mean, this is a potential threat. We don't know of anything at this instant that's planned, but we're looking ahead. And the third thing is groundwater exports. Prescott Valley have the ability, the legal right to export enough water out of the Big Chino to dry up the river. They would use that water to grow, build more houses and stuff in the Prescott Valley area. So those are 3 really severe threats that we're working on.
And just for our viewers, can you tell them a little bit about, like, why would Prescott and Prescott Valley why can't they just pump the water underneath them? Why would they have to export it and bring it in?
Well, they are pumping the water underneath them. The water in the Little Chino watershed is the source of 100% of the water served to Prescott and Prescott Valley and Chino Valley residents. And me too. I mean, I pump that water for my home in Chino. And so water levels in that area are going down 1.5 feet a year on average. And Del Rio Springs is drying up. Del Rio Springs was the traditional, the historical headwaters of the Verde River. In 1863, when they established the first territorial capital in Arizona, they did it at Del Rio Springs. And now Del Rio Springs is less than 1/10 of its pre-development flow. And that's because groundwater pumping in the Little Chino aquifer, which is up gradient from the springs, groundwater pumping there has captured water that is destined to flow out of Del Rio Springs and out of Verde Springs. So we're seeing in real time the damaging effects of groundwater pumping, how it degrades surface water flows. And that's the threat, and we're really concerned that is a vision into the future in the Big Chino.
Well, you've told me a little bit about groundwater pumping. You mentioned climate change earlier. What kind of threats does climate change pose to that section of the river, or the river in general? And, you know, what does a Verde look like in a hotter, maybe drier, more complicated climatologically world?
Well, the climate change, the best predictions we have now is that summer maximum temperatures by 2100 would be maybe 10 degrees hotter than they are now.
Just really saying something when you think about how hot it was this summer.
That's the RCP 8.5 scenario, the do-nothing scenario from the IPCC studies, just for any viewers that are up on this technical geek stuff. Sorry, I'll try and stay out of that from now on. So if we do nothing on climate change, we could see 10 degrees. And so higher temperatures mean that the soils are drier, so when it does rain, there's less water that soaks in through the ground into the aquifer. It means dead trees. It means the loss of our ponderosa pine forest. It means that there's less snow. because it's warmer, and so and it means that when it does rain, it runs off the surface really quickly and makes more flash floods, and there's less groundwater storage. So more heat, there's less rainfall. Drought is a serious issue right now, and I brought one slide that showed that we're in the worst drought right now since the 16th century.
Yeah.
I don't think people understand just how severe this drought is. And droughts in the Southwest historically have gone on for not just 1 or 2 decades, but for 10 and 20 decades.
Yeah.
So this is a piece of the future we don't know. So I don't know what the river is going to look like. I think that it's going to be smaller. And we just hope that it continues to flow. I mean, the river's flow has been flowing in that present riverbed for 2.5 million years, according to the Arizona Geological Society. I'd hate for us to kill it in 100.
Yeah, yeah. Well, with that, we're going to head off to a break really quickly here, but when we come back, we can talk a little bit about what some of those solutions you think do look like. So thanks for joining us. We'll see you on the other side. And welcome back to Listening to the Verde. I'm joined here by Dr. Gary Beverly, the president of the Citizens Water Advocacy Group and chair of the Yavapai group of the Grand Canyon chapter of the Sierra Club. We were just talking about some of the challenges that the Upper Verde faces. Sounds like groundwater pumping is a significant challenge, maybe the largest challenge, number one. And then we have a lot of uncertainties caused by climate change in the future as well. I do want to talk a little bit about what we can do about all this, because it sounds pretty scary.
Sure.
So what do you think we could do kind of as individuals, as communities, as a state? What are the different types of actions that we need to take to keep that river flowing?
Right. So as individuals, I would say, first of all, use it. Go out there to the river, hike it, appreciate it, enjoy it. Show some gratitude for this tremendous resource that we've been allowed to use, this which is just rich with wildlife and beauty. And then reciprocity is the next step.
Yeah.
Gratitude and reciprocity. Use it, enjoy it. The other big word here is stewardship. You know, this isn't necessarily ours to own, it's ours to enjoy and care for. Explore it. Explore, enjoy, and protect. That's one of the mottos of the Sierra Club. So we want people out there and learn about it. So on our on CWAG's website, that means the Citizens Water Advocacy Group, the acronym CWAG. Okay. On our website, it's CWAGAZ.org. There's a document called 10 Reasons to Protect the Verde you can download and look at. That's kind of sums things up. And then also I've got a 1-hour documentary film, Viva La Verde. And so that's also on our website. If you look in the video archive, it'll be on the first page that you see. It's a 1-hour documentary that describes the river and shows the river and the wildlife and kind of puts you there. We made this because the river is so hard for most people to visit. You know, this puts them there, the video. So learn about it. go see CWAGAZ.org and learn about the Verde River. There's a whole section there in the main menu on the Verde River with a lot of articles describing it. As far as communities, what can communities do? Well, we need to reduce groundwater pumping. So water conservation measures, communities need to learn to survive on what they've got and not import water from other places. And the other thing I think is to be careful with polluting the river with surface water runoff. And I think that's probably, it's a much bigger issue here in the Verde Valley than it is for us in the West Yavapai County because the river's not flowing through our community, but we got to keep that water clean. As far as the state level, Arizona water law is archaic. It needs to be modernized. We need legislators that are willing to tackle that difficult task. So people should vote for people that are going to vote for water, that are going to vote for the river, people that are going to work to protect the river. Right now, Arizona law has authorized, it's legal to destroy this river. Mm-hmm. It is legal.
People that's how we did. That's how all the other rivers dried up, right?
Yeah. So that's what you can do. I think we need people to enjoy it, to be more aware of it, and this is a political problem.
Mm-hmm. So you've also led efforts to list the Upper Verde as a wild and scenic river. Can you tell us what that means?
Well, Wild and Scenic River was a national land designation that was, I think it was 1968, and what it does is there's maybe 90 or something wild and scenic rivers in the United States. There's 2 wild and scenic rivers in Arizona. The Verde Wild and Scenic River begins at Beasley Flat and extends down to Red Creek, just upstream from Sheepbridge. So that's 43 miles of the Verde Wild and Scenic River. That was designated in 1980. And the Fossil Creek Wild and Scenic River is 16.5 miles on Fossil Creek. And that was designated in March 2009. We just have finished the management plan for Fossil Creek, which, don't get me started on that. But,
a long conversation.
We wish that it had been a lot better than the way it worked out, but we'll work with it. So the Verde is next. So in 2011, I wrote with a steering committee and team of Sierra Club people and community volunteers, and Chip Norton was on that. Mm-hmm. And we did a citizens proposal for the Upper Verde Wild and Scenic River. So that sets aside 50.2 miles of the river, about 12,000 acres, as proposes it as a wild and scenic river. And some pieces are wild classification, some are recreational, and some are scenic. But what this does is it protects against any federal flow diversions, which isn't a big threat here for us, but it identifies outstanding remarkable values in the river corridor. Things like cultural values, scenery, recreation, wildlife, geology, fish, ecology, and the management plan for the river has to prevent the degradation of those outstanding remarkable values and improve them. Mm-hmm. So that's the goal. So in the Upper Verde, the wildlife piece of it is really important. In the Verde watershed, there's 20 species that are listed under the Endangered Species Act. 20. That's huge.
Incredible.
That's huge. And 15 of those are riparian and aquatic species, riparian facultative and riparian obligate species. Mm-hmm. There's many, many more species of concern. They're maintained on lists by the Forest Service and Arizona Department of Game and Fish. So the wildlife values there are really important, and that's what we'd be looking for the management plan to protect when this happens. So we've got the proposal, but it hasn't been designated by Congress because we can't get the bill introduced into Congress. The bill's all written. The problem is that the local congressional representative, Gosar, is not a big fan of public lands, and we're just waiting for a more favorable political environment. And so actually right now we're conservationists throughout the state are starting to work on a statewide wild and scenic river bill that will include many rivers, and it'll get us around this political block, and this would be part of the national 30 by 30 effort, which is something else we might want to talk about sometime.
Yeah.
A whole nother big story.
We'll have to have you back for sure. So we've got just a couple minutes left here. Thinking a little bit, imagine it's 2050, a few years down the road. What will the Upper Verde look like if we've been successful, and what will it look like if we haven't been successful?
Well, if we haven't been successful, it's going to be probably the Upper River area will be dry. And that critical habitat for those fish will be lost.
And that's soon. I mean, that's just a couple of decades off.
Yeah, it might take 2070 or something like that. But it all depends on when that Prescott starts pumping water out of the Big Chino. So we would lose an incredible wildlife resource. And the Verde watershed has like 3/4 of the wildlife species in the entire state of Arizona. Why? Because we wiped out all the other rivers. There's kind of no place left for them to go. And so the Yavapai Apache people have talked to me a lot about this. And one of the big points they make is that when you're harvesting, you don't take it all. So we don't take this last surviving living river in the state. We don't take the last one. You don't pick all the berries. You don't take all the water. Yeah.
And so a last question here then, with just a few seconds we have left. If that were to happen, if the Upper Verde were to dry up, and again, it doesn't sound like it's that far off in the future, what would that mean to you personally?
Well, I really appreciate wildlife and habitat and places to go and hike where you can soak your head in a quiet space and recenter your whole psyche, and so losing that would be a problem. I mean, there's tremendous recreational values there. We're making a lot more people. We're not making any more land. We need to protect these places. We don't want to lose them. It isn't so much, in other words, what it would mean to me is I think the loss of wildlife habitat would be an embarrassment to our culture. If we lose this river, it would confirm that we're just incapable of caring for the earth that sustains us. And I think that has dire implications for our future as a species on Earth. We need to wake up and take care of climate change. We need to protect these places as part of a climate change adaptation. We need to respect these other life forms that are non-human people.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us,
Sure.
Gary. It's been a real pleasure to have you with us here today. I know I've learned a lot. I hope all of our viewers have as well. This has been Listening to the Verde. Thank you for joining us here, and we'll see you next time.
Listening to the Verde is brought to you by Friends of the Verde River. Please visit verderiver.org/listening for more videos and resources.